everyone, and welcome to another Half Pint session. Today, we've got a returning guest, Sørina Higgins. Welcome back to the show.
Cheers. It's lovely to be back with you.
Cheers. So, we've got some things to talk about, but what's been up with you?
Well, I have just gotten back from 3 weeks in Oxford, where I was a scholar in residence at the Kilns. I know, alas, alas. So it was just an amazing time living in Jack's house and enjoying his desk and his books and his company. I found myself talking to him all the time and then getting up and taking the bus into the Bodleian most mornings so that I could pursue research there.
Did you go looking in the space between the rooms? Because I know that they found the sword that Joy gave Jack, and I think if I got the opportunity to stay there, I'm heading straight for that. It's like, did they miss anything? Am I going to find the manuscripts that he said he burnt?
Right. Oh, I definitely went looking. And those eaves they're these triangular eaves beyond the rooms, and they're exactly like the ones in The Magician's Nephew. That there are the trusses that hold up the house that are spaced maybe 18 inches on center. And so if you were to step in there, you would have to be very careful to step from one beam to another, else you would go through the plaster. But alas, no one is allowed to go in there now for that reason, because a tourist's foot has once emerged through the ceiling into the room below.
Ruining it for the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. But Debbie Higgins, no relation, who is the warden and has been taking care of that project for a long time, has made a beautiful little imitation little end room in one of those eaves. So you can open the door and look in, and she's carpeted it and put in a wardrobe, and the wardrobe's doors are open, and there's a snowy scene lit up inside. So it's sort of worlds within worlds within worlds.
Well, actually, since you were there, did you visit? There's a basically a place that you can rent nearby that they built this house in the woods that's all Narnia themed.
Right. No, I did not visit it, unfortunately. My time was absolutely packed, but I did look at all the pictures, and it's an Airbnb. You can rent this space, and apparently there's a lot of virtual reality projections in addition to the place being built in a Narnian style.
I'm intrigued. One of our patron supporters, Carlotta, she's actually going to be a scholar in residence over Christmas, and I have tasked her, go check it out, because my wife has approved it. She says next time we're in Oxford, we can stay there. So I'm super excited.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, stay in C.S. Lewis's house or in sort of actual Narnia. Either is wonderful.
Okay. So you were staying there as a scholar in residence. What were you doing?
That's right. I am working on writing the lectures for one of the great courses from the teaching company. And this course will be an introduction to the Inklings. And when I first signed the contract for this, I knew I would have to learn a lot more about the other guys. That I know a bit about Lewis, Tolkien, and Williams, and less, but maybe passable, about Barfield. But I know almost nothing about the other gentlemen. And I have been discovering amazing, amazing things. So we'll have to get together for another talk later when I've finished it, because I'm going to explode the field of Inkling studies. Everything we think we know is wrong. It all needs to be revised. We need to look at it again. Now, I mean, I exaggerate a bit. I'm being a bit clickbaity, but there really are things that have to be re-examined, especially sort of the chronology, the personnel, and the different emphases and themes of the Inklings at various stages of their existence, as well as the relative importance of the other people who came and went as attendees of the group.
Yeah, we've had a number of people speak to us recently about some of the lesser known Inklings, and all of them are fascinating at the very least. Dr. Havard, there should be a book coming out, I think, hopefully next year, maybe in the following.
Odell on the medical Inkling, really good work.
Yeah, I'm really excited to learn more about him, because fascinating. And it was really interesting seeing what Lewis had edited of his work that went into the problem of pain, and it just makes me want more and more to have, been a fly on the wall in one of those Inklings meetings.
Yes, exactly. But when we piece it all together, we can almost do that when we start looking at the notes they have in their journals and their letters and so forth.
Well, one day they're going to invent the holodeck, so I will actually be able to, step back into the Eagle and Child as it was.
We're not far from that.
Wonderful. Okay, so you Spent your time there.
Yep.
That was the research you were doing.
Yep.
And you contacted me a little while ago about a conference that you are planning.
That's right. There's a conference coming up at the end of January, beginning of February, at the Internet Archive in San Francisco. And the concept is one that's really dear to the Inklings. So the conference is not specifically Inklings exclusive, although there will be some emphasis on them. But this idea is one that they really loved. And it's the concept of what should we save? What should we preserve? So we're using the title Fahrenheit 2451. The idea being, if you could choose just one cultural work to save that you would know it would still exist in the year 2451, what would you preserve? And why? And how? And what are its values? And what are the questions that are raised? So this is what the conference will be addressing. And there's a beautiful synchronicity between that and the lectures I'm working on, because as I'm working on the lectures for the teaching company, I've been asking, what is the big idea that the Inklings share that matters for us today? And I've realized that it's the idea of significance. So it's the idea that things matter. So you probably feel like things in your life matter. You probably feel like it's important if you fall in love, get married, have a baby, lose somebody. You feel like it matters. But if you're just a random concatenation of biochemicals and material products, why would it matter? Why would the loss of a loved one or a whole civilization be any worse than my cat killing a mouse or someone exterminating an anthill? But the Inklings come to us and they say, no, you're right. When you feel like things matter, you're right. And the way they went about explaining why and how things matter is they preserved and transmitted the old stories. They took the old myths that have these archetypes. So for everything that's important to us in our hearts, in our lives, there's a story where that thing is sort of written in large characters. And so they turn to these stories and they pass them on and they say, look, we need to save these ideas, these stories, and pass them on because they help us to understand why things matter. They help us to understand why our hearts break and why we love someone and why it's wrong, not to just treat each other like ants in an anthill or something like that. So that's how these two ideas are sort of weaving together. And I'm really hoping to get a lot of people contributing brilliant ideas to our conference.
And who are you having keynoting?
So we have David and Crystal Downing, former co-directors of the Marion Wade Center, and we have Owen Barfield, that is Owen A. Barfield, the grandson of the Inkling. So they'll be speaking to us about the work of Barfield, Lewis, Sayers, and also Crystal's giving a fascinating talk on how signs and symbols for communicating ideas change over time.
Yeah, she has a book on symbiotics, I seem to recall.
She does, yeah, on semiotics.
Yeah.
So how about you? If you were to pick something that you would make sure you could save and still be around in 400 years, some odd, what would you pick?
Oh, see, it's tempting because it's one of those things like Desert Island Discs or Desert Island Books, and so
exactly.
Well, I'd want a book on shipbuilding, obviously, so I can get off the island. And part of me goes, just go for volume, just say the Lord of the Rings, because not only is it a great work of literature, there's a lot of it. So if I get to retain that it's more as retained in volume. I'm also kind of tempted just to say The Great Divorce because it's my favorite of Lewis's books, and it's the one that's had the biggest impact on me personally. So I kind of like the idea of paying that forward to somebody in centuries ahead.
Do that, because I imagine The Lord of the Rings will be covered. I imagine enough people will sign up for The Lord of the Rings. So you can do The Great Divorce.
Yeah, it's true, but it's always very difficult when you've got to choose one thing because different books strike you at different points in your life in terms of it. That a certain book, it seems to have just been crafted for that particular moment in your life. For example, when you were grappling with the question of suffering, And so books like Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People, Where Is God When It Hurts, and The Problem of Pain and A Grief Observed. These are books that have been profoundly important to me at a particular point in my life.
Right.
And so to try and pull one out for posterity, that would be very difficult. And even now I'm saying it, my brain is going to the book that we're currently reading, which is Perelandra, but and then back to its predecessor, Out of the Silent Planet, because what Out of the Silent Planet has as fiction, we are now getting dangerously close to being able to make reality, to be able to, jump off the ball of dirt that is the Earth and go to other planets and colonize them with all the inherent dangers and problems, both technologically, but also morally.
Right. Moral, ethical. Well, and let's go to the third volume of the trilogy. How prescient was that hideous strength? My last day in
and bonkers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a crazy book. My last day in the UK, I took a touristy day in London and went to Westminster Abbey and bookstore and cafe and things, and then rounded it off with an immersive, interactive theatrical performance of 1984.
Oh, wow.
Why did I want to subject myself to this?
Some people just get into a groove of dystopian literature. It actually happened to us when we were at school. We did 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451. I want to say there was at least one more, but I don't know what made the English department think, you know what teenagers really need to think about? Just like the worst possible future that they're going to be growing into.
Well, if it equips us to try to prevent those futures or to deal with them when they come, great. But looking at recent evidence from the human race, I don't think we've learned those lessons. And then the next day I had a horrendous travel experience where I was pulled by security and treated incredibly rudely, and they wouldn't let me through and said, you have explosives in your things, et cetera, and I missed my flight. But the worst of it was just how inhuman their treatment was of me and everyone else. There's an assumption, guilty until proven innocent. There's an assumption you are a criminal unless you can prove to us that you're not. And perhaps having just seen 1984, I was not, shall we say, as polite as I might usually be.
Which airport were you flying out of? Heathrow?
Stansted.
Ah, yes.
It was a nightmare. I ended up being in security lines for probably over 5 hours that day.
When I flew back from England with my family this year, we flew out of Manchester, the older terminal. The computers were down. We missed our flight because they couldn't check us in. Oh, and that's with small children. It's a particular circle of hell. That's not
having small children with you. That's particularly difficult. Yeah, I felt so badly for all the little kids in line. But yes, all that to say, we need those books as well. And it is terrible to say, let's just pick one. And so I think that's why it's important to look at larger communities of cultural creation and cultural preservation, right? I think part of the point of the end of Fahrenheit 451 is, well, if we only had one dude left alive to memorize one book, that it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't work. Like the whole point was there was this community, this living, walking, breathing library. And they were in conversation with each other about these works as well. So we want to look at that at the conference, like communities of interpretation and transmission. We want people to bring up challenges and difficulties, whether they're just technical difficulties of how do we save these things, or the more vexed questions of, well, whose cultures are most at risk of being lost, and who has to fight harder than others to make sure that their literature and languages and arts and so forth get passed along. Are there some things that should not be preserved? I mean, the Internet Archive has faced challenges when it preserves material that's seen as, hate-driven or pornographic, etc. Are there things that should disappear?
Yeah. And also, I suppose there's also the question of what should we actually know? The idea of forbidden knowledge. Maybe some things are forbidden for a very, very good reason. So you've got the keynotes.
Yes.
Can people still submit papers for the
They
conference?
can. They can still submit papers until January 1st. I don't know when this episode will drop, but
Very soon.
even
It
if
will still be an
someone,
advent.
even if someone comes across it a couple days later, contact us and see where we are, see if we still have space. And we've gotten proposals for talks on books and architecture and paintings, and ones that are sort of more technical and ones that are more philosophical. We're also particularly interested in highlighting the Internet Archive's Theological Holdings. That's a collection they have that hasn't been used and accessed as much as some of the others. So we're particularly interested in people from religious studies perspectives and looking at preserving sacred texts. Are there particular challenges involved with that?
And I mean, I suppose particularly when it comes to the ideas of worth preserving, religion is one of the key areas where that takes place with all of the things that you've described, because religious texts don't arise in a vacuum.
Right.
They are usually produced by a community and preserved by a community, and then there's an interpretive tradition that is then usually passed on. In Christian terms, we call that the deposit of faith, that is then passed down as so to shape how people read those texts. For the past year, I've been reading the Quran, and so I've been digging into way more Arabian scholars than I ever thought I was ever going to. But it's really interesting seeing some of the interpretive traditions pop up in time, and how a particular text, or at least its popular meaning, can change over time.
Yes.
And then you have the age-old question, well, what should you do? Should you go back earlier to the source? Is that going to be likely to be more authentic? Or is the later source going to be more nuanced, more synthesized, more drawing on a broader community of interpretation?
Right. Oh, those brilliant questions. Now, do you read Arabic? Are you reading it
No.
in Arabic? Okay. Because I know that that's one of the beliefs, that, it must be read and studied and preserved in Arabic. And my sister, who is a linguist and does intercultural studies, she was looking at some questions like, for instance, technology and sacred texts. So here's a very specific question. Is it okay to have the Quran on your phone? Because the actual book itself is seen as a more important object than, for instance, the Bible usually is in most Christian traditions. So, is it okay to then have the Quran in your pocket if you go into a washroom, for instance? Or is that, is that a blasphemous or sacrilegious act? So,
yeah, there was a thing several years ago. There was a lectern with basically an iPad inside the lectern, which was going to be used for reading the readings at church.
Yep.
And a lot of people reacted very viscerally to it. It's like, this is terrible. And particularly for people from a more sacramental tradition, we take the sacred page and it is lifted up. It is sprinkled with holy water. You can't, that's not good with an iPad. And it's kissed. So the idea of the corporeal nature of a text is important, as it is in Islam, because there's a whole set of rules as to which hand you're allowed to carry it with, and what you must do before and after, and how technology just raises a whole lot of questions with regards to those rules when the text is in that form.
Now, I myself don't see what's less corporeal about an iPad than about a piece of paper, but I understand all the attendant questions that are raised by it. Like, for one thing, it's not a single use. Everything else is on there as well,
Yes.
And then
it's for one day. It is
water.
Literally holy. It is set apart for one particular purpose, and also it can't change. And particularly, say, in Islam, where the idea of perfect preservation is so absolutely central to at least modern Islam, having the text physically there and not occasionally being swapped out with a game of Angry Birds is I'd imagine particularly significant.
I like that. Yeah, the single use. I stayed in an Airbnb in London, and it was a Muslim family was hosting me, and it was really fascinating to me to be walking along this row of homes that all looked exactly the same on the outside. But as soon as I opened the door, I entered into a different culture and into a different type of space where their particular practices and customs prevailed. And they had decorated the interior of their house to resemble, I believe they were from Pakistan. So they had decorated the interior to resemble their home culture. And they had various laws from the hadith posted on the walls, etc. So it was like, once you pass through that door, you're sort of out of the ordinary time timeline of London that's rushing by with the buses, et cetera. And you sort of step into a different sort of space and time. And I really appreciated the physicality of that.
And that is one of the ways in which some of the ideas are retained, because they're retained in an environment that is set apart. Years ago, I read, I think it was a book by the Dalai Lama, and he was saying how he had spoken to Jewish people, because given the precarious nature of Tibet, he was asking them, how do you retain a culture when you're in the diaspora? Because that's something that the Jews have been doing for a long, long time. And the answer that he received was tied up in all of this, that we retain our identity by surrounding all that we do in a framework that supports and points to that identity. Right. The retaining of feasts, the retaining of a distinctive dress, mode of speech, even language sometimes.
So there's physicality, there's community, and there's liturgy. These are means of preservation beyond simply, do we have the right form of digital file that will be reverse compatible with the future's devices that can read it, right?
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, where actually is this conference going to be?
Right. So this conference is in San Francisco at the Internet Archive building, and it will be on January the 30th and February the 1st, 2025.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about it, or you want to get off your chest?
There will also, in addition to the 2-day scholarly conference, there will be 2 evening events that are open to the public. And what we're planning to do for that evening is have a panel of guests and experts, and we will watch selections from great classic films and discuss adaptation and preservation. So we're planning that one night it'll be from the original first Star Wars movie, and another night it will be from The Fellowship of the Ring. And so this will bring up so many interesting conversations about, is adaptation preservation of a work, or is it actually, as a lot of
distortion
groups, is it actually distortion, corruption? Is it actually, ruining the work? Does that depend on whether or not it drives people back to the text? I would like to bring up, well, what if it's a different situation where there is no text, say with the Arthurian legends? There is no one right book. So does that mean every adaptation is equally legitimate and equally faithful? Or are there ones that somehow violate some spirit of the collective story, something like that?
That's actually a particular challenge I've been dealing with for the last 6 months to a year, because I've been reading a lot to Alexander, and I've been reading him a lot of fairy tales. There are a lot of different versions of those fairy tales. So he has now heard multiple conflicting versions of each of them, including some modern adaptations. His favorite being, it's Little Red Riding Hood, but it's called Little Red Hot, about a cowgirl who really loves spicy food. But it's basically the Little Red Riding Hood story. And every now and again he will ask me, it's like, but I thought this happened. It's like, oh, that was in another version of the story. He hasn't yet asked me which one's right.
Yeah, so I was wondering, how does your toddler handle this higher textual criticism?
Magnificently. That's the answer. Magnificently.
So far he's just embracing all the versions. I really like that.
Yep. Yeah. Without any great problem. He's still a few years away from me introducing to him the original Star Wars, and then telling him that there are no other movies that were then made.
Oh, see, you're going to have to preserve this fiction. You're going to have to lock him in some kind of hermetic world if he's never going to encounter those other movies that weren't made.
I'm willing to do it for the good of the children.
Well, it sounds like you're raising him with enough literary analytical skills. He'll be all right. He'll be able to handle
I think he'll be fine.
Yeah. And we will also have a costume contest both of those evenings as well. So we will take this, these literary works that we're talking about transmitting, and we will embody them there. And there'll be prizes of books from our guest speakers for the costume contest.
I love that. The podcast, The Mythmakers, which is based in Oxford. Their final question on all of their podcasts is, where in the fantasy worlds would you most like to? And then it's fill in the blank. So get a coffee, read a book. I don't think they've ever actually done one purely on fashion. If you were to live in any fantasy world, specifically for the clothes, where would it be?
Yeah. Well, I do really appreciate that in Narnia, and we learned this in The Silver Chair, that the beautiful clothes are also the most comfortable. That when you dress up in your fanciest for going to the ball or whatever, they actually feel good to wear, which is hardly ever the case in the real world. So there's a very, very practical answer. I'd like to be comfortable as well. But there are many, many worlds that have gorgeous fashion. So I'd have to think about that.
Yeah, I actually would be tempted to say Pan Am from the Hunger Games, because everyone dresses absolutely crazily there. I think that would just be endlessly entertaining.
It would. And that's actually a thoughtful part of the Hunger Games, too, is how fashion is used for interpretation and communication, and how Katniss's fashion designer is just a genius about portraying her in a way that might actually save her life by what she's wearing, because it communicates a certain mood, attitude. Yeah.
It's like my wife in shopping. She says, "I need this. It's important for my life." It's like, okay, all right, I'll take it.
Very good.
Wonderful. Well, Sørina, thanks again for coming on the show, and I'm looking forward to having you on the audio podcast. It'll be in 2025 then, when we do our Charles Williams month. Yes. I have 5 Charles Williams books on Audible, and I will be starting them in the new year.
All right. Well, you know who you can call if you have questions.
Well, you actually basically selected them, because I went to your post where you said in the order in which you should read them. So I have them all.
So you're just doing novels then?
Yes.
Okay.
The 5 that I think you chose first. Those were all the novel ones.
Okay.
I'll have to get into his explicit theology and poetry stuff some other time.
Right, and his plays. There's so much else. Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll see how Charles Williams' month goes, and if I survive, I'm sure he'll be returning.
It'll be all right. You might be a little perplexed when you emerge, but you'll also probably be inspired.
Well, we hope this hasn't been confusing for you back at home, and we also hope that you will also return next time, when we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.
Cheers.